Hello and a warm welcome to you on this edition of Business Africa. I am Afolake Winloye. The top stories this week. UN urges Africa to develop regulations to spur e-commerce growth. China's Xi Jinping inks deals in Rwanda on whirlwind tour. And they are in the 30s and ambitious. More young Nigerians are now starting farming, a growth sector in the gigantic country with nearly 180 million mouths to feed. Kenya, South Africa and Nigeria lead the continent in the performance of e-commerce as they all recorded approximately 6% of overall trade as being conducted in digital platform as of the end of 2017. Kenya has one of the most advanced mobile money payment systems in the world with about 85% of adults having a mobile bank account. According to UNCTAD, high financial inclusion is not sufficient condition to catalyze e-commerce, especially in the rural areas of the continent that lack physical infrastructure to provide efficient delivery systems. It is on that basis that UNCTAD and the African Union have jointly organized the first ever UNCTAD Regional E-Commerce Week that will take place from December 10 to 14 in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Daniel Momberi and Ruth Lago with more.
African e-commerce market is growing at an extraordinary rate, with the number of startups entering the market increasing year by year to a total of 264 companies operating across the continent. In the context of the digital age, increased connectivity of a young growing African population, with mobile penetration rates of more than 90%, technological innovations are driving digital disruption and impacting the traditional relationship dynamics between producers, sellers and consumers. E-commerce opportunities are opening up multi-sector access to new markets, new consumers and new products, with e-commerce sales in Africa expected to reach between $50 billion and $75 billion per year within the next 5 to 10 years. This year, the first ever edition of Africa E-Commerce Week is taking place in Nairobi from 10th to 14th December, organized by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. It is part of UNCTAD's ongoing work to promote and understand the opportunities offered by e-commerce and the digital economy for developing countries in Africa and elsewhere. The United Nations urged African states to develop regulations in order to spur e-commerce growth. Mukisa Kituyi, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, said the continent lags behind the rest of the world in the uptake of digital trade due to lack of a conducive ecosystem. He further stressed that Africa needs to develop laws to enhance on integrity of procurement on electronic platforms so that consumers can trust e-commerce platforms.
Pilar Fajan, Economic Affairs Officer from UNCTAD, is joining us from Nairobi, Kenya, for more on that report. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me here.
Accelerating Africa's industrialization through digitalization and youth techpreneurship. How can entrepreneurs contribute to Africa's industrialization? What are the main challenges to grow?
Really entrepreneurs are the key for any industrialization and diversification process, which is very important because in Africa we know the production structure is really in need of industrialization and diversification. But what we know is that up to now, most of the discussion related to e-commerce and the digital economy is focusing mainly on access to ICT infrastructure and internet use, and also the readiness for using it. But what is also important to look at is how internet is used, what we do with the digital economy. So in developing countries and in Africa, data show that there is a strong use for social media, but not so much for commercial or productive purposes. And there are concerns in these countries. E-commerce may lead more to increasing imports that will flood the countries instead of increasing access to export markets. So what is important is to extend the focus of our discussion from only the consumption side, to the production aspects of the digital economy. This means that African countries need to seek to benefit from the digital economy, not only as consumers or importers, but also as producers and exporters. Moving finally to the main challenges from your question, what we see is, and we have heard mainly from African policymakers, is that the main problem is lack of finance, also insufficient developments of relevant digital entrepreneurial skills, and difficulties in competing with powerful global players.
Now, what new financing mechanisms can be put in place to support entrepreneurs into e-commerce, for instance, in Africa?
Yeah, as I mentioned, probably the main challenge for entrepreneurs is financing, lack of financing. And what we know is that in Africa, banking finance is quite complicated, commercial banks finance, because of the high risk attached to these entrepreneurships. So there is a need to look for these innovative mechanisms, but to try to do a combination of traditional and innovative mechanisms. And these innovative mechanisms is mainly venture capital, business angels, impact investment, or crowdfunding. We know that mostly startups in the digital economy are financed probably by venture capital. We know that there are a number of global venture capital funds, but they are not so much coming to Africa. And to my knowledge, there is only just one African venture capital, which is TL.com. So it would be important to try to promote the creation or the enhancing the financing through different systems. But as I mentioned, it is important to combine innovative systems, financing systems, with traditional systems like maybe also public financing and also the support from regional and multilateral development banks.
Now, which strategies should governments prioritize to foster such initiative?
What governments need to do to support digital entrepreneurship in general is what is very important to have a supportive digital entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem with a multi-stakeholder collaborative approach between the state, the private sector, and research institutions. In this context, what is very important for digital entrepreneurship is to promote it through technology hubs, innovate incubators and accelerators.
Well, thank you very much for those insights. Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Rwanda and granted a loan to build 2 roads. More details coming right after this break. Stay with us.